This is the original podcast edition of The Guild of the Cowry Catchers by Abigail Hilton, now part of the complete Pirates of Wefrevane series. The books are available as audiobooks, ebooks, and paperbacks. This podcast originally aired from 2010 to 2014. Stick around after the story for commentary from me, the author, more than a decade later. Skydance. A Panamindorah story. Related to the Guild of the Cowry Catchers series. Written and narrated by Abigail Hilton. Part 1. Thessaline Clambottom had known the Griffin Cheshire for an entire season before she realized that Cheshire had no wings. At 5 years of age, Thessaline did not stand quite to Cheshire's elbow, and, when she reached her arms around the downy neck, her fingers fell short of the shoulder blades. Cheshire had been reading for Thessaline throughout the summer and fall, but it was not until a chilly day in early winter that the normally formal and business-like Griffin allowed her small charge to fall asleep in the crook of her warm body. Then Thessaline reached up, drowsily, and touched the stumps of Cheshire's wings. Thessaline felt Cheshire stiffen. She was astute enough, even at 5, to understand that she must not act surprised by things that others had seen, and she could not. After that, Cheshire lay down in her presence more often, and seemed more at ease. Thessaline was 6 years old before she summoned the nerve to ask about Cheshire's wings. An accident, was all Cheshire would say. It was about that time that Thessaline also became aware that Cheshire's great, gentle paws were always velvet. No matter how she stroked the downy fur, Thessaline could not feel even the hint of a claw. With Cheshire's assistance, Thessaline was consuming books far beyond her classmates. She had plenty of time for it, as her peers avoided her. A blind child from a peasant family was an anomaly at Mance's prestigious school of minstrels, and her first year had not been easy. The other children were either younger sons and daughters of ruling families, or the well-placed children of wealthy merchants and artisans. All had exceptional talent, else they'd never have been admitted, but Thessaline was a prodigy. Everyone knew it, before even hearing her sing. How else could a yokel from the backwaters of the small kingdoms have been admitted to the archipelago's premier school of music? She must have a wealthy patron, probably her island's ruling family. Patronage, however, did not appear to extend to clothes and meals, as she dressed in the simplest of garb and ate in the lowest ranking of the dining halls. Her accent was coarse, and her manners untrained. Her name said it all. Some of the students had taken to calling her Clammy Bottom, but not while she sang. When Thessaline sang, no one talked. No one laughed. They hardly breathed. And so, after the first year, they mostly ignored her. The school council wasn't sure how to deal with her handicap at first, but, after a season, they'd provided her with Cheshire for reading and navigating, and the occasional correction of her manners, and the problem seemed solved. From what Thessaline gathered, Cheshire was an old brood griffin. She'd raised a cub every 2 or 3 years for many seasons, but that had ceased some time ago, and now she mostly ran errands for the school to surrounding villages. Cheshire did not speak much of her life before the school, and Thessaline was too shy to ask. With Cheshire's help, Thessaline became proficient at navigating the school grounds. Indeed, she moved so quickly, and with such assurance, that she'd been asked for directions on several occasions by newcomers. She noticed that they did not ask Cheshire, even though the griffin was standing right beside her and could obviously see. In the fall of Thessaline's 7th year, the two of them were prowling the library after classes, looking for new stories. Thessaline had recently begun to stray into the advanced section. It was the largest music library in Wefrevane, including both music and scholarly texts, but it did not seem large to a 7-year-old girl who made it the focus of her every waking moment. Ballads were a minstrel's main fare, stories of heroes and gods and love and war. Thessaline knew most of the books by the feel of their spines and the smell of their ink and vellum. their various shapes and sizes. She could locate her favorites by their accustomed places on the shelves. Cheshire was a dexterous creature, but her great beak was meant for eviscerating prey, not turning the delicate pages of old books. So Thessaline opened each one, and turned each page as Cheshire read. She knew which pages were rough or torn, and she could turn quickly to her favorite sections. The books were like the faces of old friends beneath her fingers, but all of their voices were Cheshire's. She'd climbed upon a table and was going along the top shelf, examining advanced books and scrolls, many of which contained ballads that Cheshire declared, "within your skill but beyond your years," a phrase that Thessaline had come to associate with the lurid love ballads favored by many courts in the last half-century. She came upon a slim volume at the end of one shelf. The spine crackled under her fingers. Old leather. Not well maintained. Odd. What's this? It smelled like something she could not identify. Sheepskin vellum was the most common medium in the library, followed by zebra skin. But this book smelled like something else. Thessaline felt Cheshire's warm breath on her arm. The griffin could crane her neck up to the top shelf without standing on anything. The warm breath ceased. "Cheshire?" "I'm here, lady." "What's this one called?" Cheshire seemed baffled. A rare thing. "It is in another language, lady." Many of the texts in the library were in languages or dialects other than common Grishnard. It was a minstrel's role to learn as many of these as possible, and Thessaline's Magian was coming along nicely, as was her knowledge of the uncouth Hunty speech. Cheshire had never seemed perturbed by a foreign language before. "Which language?" The griffin seemed to compose herself. "It is sometimes called High Grishnard, lady." "Sometimes?" Thessaline reached to stroke the griffin's beak, in an effort to offer reassurance. "Always, lady," said Cheshire quickly. "It is always called High Grishnard. It was the language spoken here hundreds of years ago. It is considered a barbaric tongue in these days, and not often sung. The book is small. I am sure that it is a scholarly text, dry and uninteresting." Thessaline smirked. "Whenever you tell me something is uninteresting, it always turns out to be full of beautiful fainting women and dashing sweaty men." Cheshire gave a snort. "In this case, lady, I doubt very much that the book contains fainting or sweating." "I want to read it." Thessaline pulled the fragile volume from the shelf. She started to toss it onto the table, changed her mind, and crouched to set it down gently. The book felt as though it might disintegrate in her hands. "Do you think it's hundreds of years old, Cheshire? Thousands? It feels like thousands. And it smells like—" Cheshire's voice sounded anxious. "Thessaline, I suspect this book was misfiled. The president's private library is next door. I suspect that this volume belongs there. We should take it to the curator." Thessaline reached for Cheshire's ruff. She ran her hand through the downy feathers, feeling the taut muscles beneath. "You are afraid. Why?" She opened the book. "Just a few pages," she begged. "Read me a few pages, and if it has something terrible in it, we'll take it to the curator. I promise." Thessaline could read voices as others read faces, but Cheshire's voice had taken on a tone that she could not identify. "I do not know High Grishnard, lady. I suspect you will study it in 3 or 4 years when you reach the advanced classes. It is scattered throughout the older ballads, words here and there, but not entire songs." Thessaline hesitated. She did not like to upset Cheshire. "Can you at least hum a little of the music?" Cheshire had a passable singing voice. She could convey a tune well enough, and Thessaline had an ear like a sponge. Cheshire hesitated for so long that Thessaline thought she would not answer. Then she realized that the griffin was concentrating on the page. With a sound so low that it seemed hardly more than a resonance in her chest, Cheshire began to hum. Thessaline leaned back against Cheshire's breastbone, straining to memorize the cadences of the music. The griffin broke off a moment later. "The notation is archaic," she said quickly. "I am not certain I have it right." "It's beautiful," breathed Thessaline. and very complicated," said Cheshire. "I am not doing it justice, lady, and, although I rarely say this, the song is beyond your skill. Let us put it away. Whoever misfiled it will come looking." Cheshire seemed unhappy. So, without further questions, Thessaline did as she was bid. She never found the book in that room again, although she searched for it. She did not mention her search to Cheshire. Sometimes, though, in the years that followed, when Thessaline felt joyful or content, she would hum that bit of music from the mysterious book. If there was anyone else around, Cheshire would shush her. If not, the griffin would grow very still and listen. Part 2. During her third year at the school, Thessaline made more friends. She had become so adept at finding her way that new students often took an entire season to realize that she was blind. She went home to Hullavaris once, and so impressed Lord Hullivar with her singing that he chose to make an investment in her. Now she ate at the mid-level dining hall and dressed in flowing gowns more suited to her future occupation. One day, one of her classmates confided in Thessaline that her father's mistress had died, and the lady had been more of a mother to the girl than ever her real mother had. She could not go into official mourning, but she was in great distress. The distress eventually passed, but the friendship between Thessaline and Lady Margot Haplag did not. Thessaline had a gift for listening, as well as a sense of humor that startled those who did not know her. Her lack of a distinct social class, or a home court in the Great Islands, made her an ideal confidant. The prejudices of her classmates, and even their jealousy at her skill, disintegrated in the face of her guileless goodwill. As a result, she soon had more than enough classmates who would happily read for her. By the time she was 8, Thessaline did not need Cheshire's services in the classroom, and rarely out of it. Her speech and manners had become indistinguishable from the royalty and nobility that surrounded her, and she could slip easily into the high-flown language of the ballads that would be her livelihood. However, she was loath to part with the old griffin. She invented the pretext of daily walks on the wooded cliffs above the beach, during which she simply must have a guide for safety's sake. She told her instructors that the walks helped her compose music, which was true. Composition was a large part of her advanced classwork. She told the instructors that she needed time alone in walking. No one ever seemed to think that she was not truly alone with Cheshire. One day in late summer, when she was 9 years old, Thessaline took such a walk, in a state of great high spirits. She had been told that she would have an apprentice tour in the spring, when she turned 10. Very few students received enough invitations for an apprentice tour. Their debut tour would be sponsored by the school, but apprentice tours were made only at the request and sponsorship of the courts that the child would visit. It augured well for Thessaline's future that she had so impressed visitors to the school. The court in Manse had welcomed her for unofficial visits on several occasions, and now wanted a formal performance. The Majan court was asking to see her, as were several of its large holdings. The court on Haplag had not yet extended an invitation, but several of its prominent families had. Thessaline's instructors were extremely pleased, and Thessaline was excited at the prospect of travel. She told Cheshire all this as they walked, with the sea breeze playing across her face and the first of the autumn leaves crunching beneath her bare paws. The smell of the woods mingled pleasantly with the smell of the ocean. Cheshire was quiet. She'd never been a demonstrative griffin, but she'd always been encouraging. Thessaline stopped at last in a spot that she liked, where she could feel the sun on her face and hear the far-off caesura of the waves on the rocks below. "Cheshire, is something wrong?" The griffin shook herself. "No, nothing, lady. I am very happy for you." "You don't sound happy." Thessaline moved her hand towards Cheshire's head, but the griffin deftly lifted it out of her reach. "It is only that I will miss you, lady," she said softly. Thessaline laughed. "I won't be gone forever. Only for the spring. Then I shall come back and not go away again until my debut tour at 14. Cheshire sighed. "I'm sure that seems a very long time to you, lady. It does not seem so long to me." Thessaline frowned. "I wish you'd call me Thess." The Gryphon gave a little snort. Thessaline was sure that it was meant to sound like a laugh, but it didn't. "Cheshire, sit down with me a moment." Thessaline made herself comfortable on the grass, and, after a moment, Cheshire stretched out beside her. It was only then that Thessaline became certain of what she'd suspected earlier. Cheshire was trembling. When Thessaline stroked her head and beak, she felt a dampness in the feathers there. Beasts did not weep in grief. It was not their instinctive response. However, they did sometimes shed tears of pain. Cheshire's behavior implied that, whatever the problem was, it had reached the pitch of physical pain. "Cheshire," whispered Thessaline in horror. "What's wrong? Oh, my friend, whatever is the matter?" The Gryphon turned her head away again, as though ashamed. After a moment, she said, "Do you remember that book we found in the library once? The one I couldn't read to you?" "In High Grishnard?" asked Thessaline. "With the beautiful tune? The one that always makes you nervous when I hum it?" "I know someone who could have read the words for us," whispered Cheshire. "I wish now that I'd asked him. I wish that he could have heard you sing that song. Just once." Thessaline stroked Cheshire's shoulders, ignoring the misshapen stumps of her wings. She realized, suddenly, that she'd never heard Cheshire talk about other friends before. "You must have loved him very much. Is he dead?" "Dying," said Cheshire quietly. "He's old like me, and now he's dying." Thessaline stood up. "Well then, we have no time to lose." Cheshire did not rise. "You don't understand, lady. You can't go to him. He's—" Thessaline tossed her head. "I can and I will. I don't care who he is. I'm sure I can get the president to loan me that book for an afternoon." Cheshire struggled to her feet. Her voice sounded panicky. "No, Thessaline, no. You must never ask about that book, not of any Grishnard. Do you understand? Never." Thessaline was taken aback. "All right, then," she said humbly. "But I remember the tune well enough. If it would please him, if it would ease your grief." Cheshire sighed. "Yes, I think it would please him." She hesitated. "He's a fawn, Thessaline, a Pegasus shelt. He works in the school's garden and fields." Thessaline was surprised, but her instincts told her to keep quiet. After a long moment, Cheshire continued. "High Grishnard is not Grishnard at all. It's the language of the Shavier fawns, the language they spoke when they ruled their own islands hundreds of years ago before the conquest. No one wants to admit that our ancient language is a fawn language, or that the old ballads are really fawn ballads. We've eaten every bit of them, even their native tongue." Thessaline considered. "That old book. It wasn't made of sheepskin or Pegasus skin, was it? Was it Grishnard skin? A Gryphon?" Cheshire sounded uncomfortable. "Grishnards aren't supposed to have such keen noses, lady. Keep that up and they'll accuse you of being a half-breed with Ocelon blood." Thessaline laughed. "I'm blind, Cheshire. I use my nose more than most." "I don't," said Cheshire. "But I know some of those old scrolls are made of such things, though more likely it is just some strange beast that lived here before the conquest." "Before we killed them all," said Thessaline softly. Before Cheshire could continue, she said, "But I guess we can't get too angry about an old book made of Grishnard skin. After all, we eat fawns and Pegasus. Lady Margot showed me her new gloves yesterday, made of leather so fine and soft that I dared not ask where it came from." "The School of Music does not serve shelt meat in its kitchens," said Cheshire severely. "No, but they serve Pegasus," said Thessaline, "and don't they talk just as you do?" Cheshire said nothing. Thessaline picked at her gown. "They'll serve fawn meat in some of the courts where I'll go on my tours. I don't know what to think about that. What should I think, Cheshire?" "I think you are unusual to even consider such things at your age," said the Gryphon softly. I think you will grow into a good and compassionate minstrel." Thessaline felt something warm on her own cheek and quickly wiped it away. "Cheshire, do you know where I came from?" "From Hollivaris, lady?" Thessaline gave a shaky laugh and then composed herself. She thought for a moment. "I can tell this story. Isn't that what they've taught me to do? To tell good stories? A little holding called Hollivaris, too," she said aloud. "Not that Hollivaris has any holdings that aren't little. I was no kind of lady, either. My family are farmers in a muddy estuary called Clam Bottom. They harvest fish and seaweed and clams. In a good year, they dry and smoke and pickle the extra, and they have some left over to trade at the local market. Most years, they barely manage to make the king's tax. If they don't make the tax, they won't keep their land. Sometimes they dive for oysters in the bay. Most years, they find a few deformed pearls that they can sell at the big market in Malabar. Every 4 or 5 years, they find a really valuable pearl. Those pearls are my family's special insurance against bad luck. They keep those pearls for years when everything goes wrong, and then sometimes a pearl is the only way they're able to eat and pay the king's tax. On the day I was born, my father found an oyster with a pearl. He says it was the most perfect pearl he ever saw, big as his thumb, and the color of new cream. He says it was the same color as my eyes. So, even though I was born blind, he called me lucky." Thessaline stopped. It was difficult to speak of her father. He liked to sing. He is, always singing as he goes about his work. I sang with him from as early as I can remember. They say I sang before I talked. I wasn't very useful about the farm, although I tried, turning the drying seaweed and cleaning the clams and the fish and the nets. I know now that some of my father's brothers thought that Thessaline stumbled over her words. Even her schooling had not given her a way to express this. They thought that I would be pretty. She finished lamely. "Hush," said Cheshire. Her voice was as gentle as Thessaline had ever heard it. "There's no need." Thessaline shook her head. "No, I want to tell you. I realize just now that you're more of a friend to me than anyone, and I've never told you anything, really." "That's not true," began Cheshire, but Thessaline continued. "I didn't know it then, but when I came home I found out. Most everyone in the family told my father to sell me to a passing ship, like a pearl found in an oyster. They wouldn't have called it selling, of course. It's illegal to sell Grishnard's slaves in Weffervane. They would have called it apprenticeship. The ship would have sold my apprenticeship to a brothel in Cern or Haplag, or perhaps they would have sold me as an outright slave in the lawless lands. Maybe if I was lucky, I would have been sold to a lord or a rich merchant, and I would have been treated well as a mistress. But either way..." Cheshire rested her great heavy head across Thessaline's lap and curled her body around the girl. Thessaline wiped her eyes again. "Not my mother, of course. She didn't want that to happen to me. But she was ill with her next pregnancy, and she'd lost so many children with accidents and disease. She'd already let go of me inside her head. But my father wouldn't do it. When I was 5 years old, he sold that pearl to send me to school here. My family was always living on the edge of ruin, but he sold the finest pearl he ever found to send me." Thessaline was losing the battle with her dignity. With her face buried in Cheshire's warm feathers, she let herself be the lonely 9-year-old that she never let anyone see. "And I miss him," she sobbed. "He's sick sometimes now, old before his time from overwork. He could have an accident in a boat on the reef any day, and I never see him again. No one in my family can write, so I've never had a letter. But when I went home 2 years ago, he told me he was proud of me. You should have heard his voice, Cheshire. And I want him to be proud, so I don't cry. But I miss him." "You'll see him again," murmured Cheshire. "You will, Thessalan. I heard Lord Hullivar himself is anxious to see you. Didn't he invite you on this coming tour?" Thessalan sat up and sniffled. "Yes, but we may not make it before winter sets in. My instructors say we must wait and see." "You'll make it," said Cheshire with confidence. "If you make your wishes clear, they will honor them." She hesitated. "I had no idea your family sent you here. I thought it was Lord Hullivar from the beginning." Thessalan shook her head. "My father petitioned, and the king did send a recommendation, but no money. It wasn't until I came home and sang for him after my second year that he sent money. I would never have been able to impress him without the training my father bought me with his pearl." "Your uncles had this much right," murmured Cheshire. "You are the pearl, my dear. Your father kept what mattered." Thessalan composed herself. "Now you know all my dark secrets." Cheshire snorted. "If that's as dark as your secrets get, the court gossips will be at a loss as to what to do with you." Thessalan did not smile. "You didn't lose your wings in an accident, did you, Cheshire? Or your claws, either?" Cheshire grew perfectly still. Thessalan stroked her head. "One of my friends tried to tell me something bad about you last year, but I shushed her. I told her I would never speak to her again if she said ill of you, and so she didn't. I can't believe you would ever do anything really bad. But I feel like you don't quite trust me, because you won't tell me. This friend of yours who's a fawn, he has something to do with it, doesn't he?" Cheshire swallowed. "If you came from the Great Islands, lady, you'd already know." "But I don't," said Thessalan, frustrated. "I came from little nowhere Hullivaris. I'd never even tasted a Pegasus before I got here. I know you think I'll come back from my tour all refined and cruel, but I won't." Cheshire sighed. "I should have told you long ago. I assumed you had heard it from someone else." She took a deep breath. "I was house griffin to one of the great families on Haplag, cousins to the king. I was not bonded to a Shelt at birth, because it is thought that unbonded female griffins breed more readily, and it is probably true. I came from excellent stock, old bloodlines, carefully selected for griffins that would bond with Shelts. My cubs were taken from me at a yellow month or so of age, before they opened their eyes. The first thing they saw would be a Grishnard, their new master or mistress, and they were to bond with that person, not with me. The only exceptions were female cubs of such quality that they were chosen for breeding. Those cubs I was allowed to raise and love." Thessalan stroked Cheshire's ears and beak. Cheshire shook herself. "It was not such a bad life. My cubs would have grown up and moved on, even if I'd been allowed to raise all of them. They went to excellent homes. But it is hard to lose one's children so often. I was friends with several of their fathers, but they were often away, hunting with the lords of the estate, sailing with them, guarding their many possessions. They were bonded to Shelts, and they were never as close to me as to their two-legged companions. As a brood griffin, I was pampered and sheltered and mostly kept at home. As I grew older and my output of cubs declined, I was given the task of helping to care for one of the lord's young sons. The child had his own bond griffin, of course, but the griffin was just a cub, and they both needed looking after. The boy had a tutor, Pavel, who was forever chasing after him. Pavel was a fawn, a Shavier slave. That was unusual, of course, but such things are sometimes done in Haplag, where free fawns own land and businesses. This fawn had been kidnapped at a young age from the Pendulon Mountains, half a world away. He was educated and literate. His slavery must have been devastating to him at the beginning, but by the time I met him, he was in late middle age, and he'd settled into his yoke. Pavel was a good teacher. He taught the boy to read, and me along with him. Together we kept the boy and his cub out of trouble." Cheshire paused. The next part is difficult for me to explain. Perhaps it is because I was a mother who missed her children, or perhaps it is something in a griffin's nature. Perhaps if I had been allowed to bond to my mates, but I wasn't. Not truly. And the griffins of Wefrevane are bred to bond to a Shelt. At any rate, I bonded with Pavel, as truly as any misty-eyed cub bonds with a Grishnard child. Thessaline traced patterns in Cheshire's downy feathers. I don't see why that should be a crime. It wasn't, exactly. It's not a crime on Haplag for a griffin to bond with a fawn. It's just shameful, and certainly inappropriate for me. I don't think I ever admitted it aloud to anyone back then, although I did say we were friends. What happened? When the child turned 12, he was sent away to school, and his tutor was sold to another family in need of his services. There was no warning. I came to visit Pavel one day in his quarters, and he was gone. The great houses often sold slaves like that, so as not to make a scene among the other staff. I tried to live with it. I tried. "Didn't you tell anyone?" asked Thessaline. "Didn't you ask whether you might go with him?" Cheshire snorted. What was I to say? I have bonded with a fawn slave, and now I cannot bear my life without him. That would not have been well received, I assure you. "But couldn't you just leave? You weren't a slave. I didn't think griffins could be bought and sold in Wefrevane." Cheshire twitched her tail. Adult griffins in Wefrevane cannot be purchased, it's true. Cubs can, but only before they open their eyes. Our legal status on most islands is much like that of a Grishnard child. We are not slaves, but we cannot own property either. I could not have purchased Pavel's freedom. I owned no money, no matter how much the sale of my cubs had brought the estate. A master who kills his griffin can be prosecuted for murder, although that rarely happens. A strange griffin hunting on a Grishnard's property is poaching, and may be killed for it, just as any Shelt. So I could not simply relocate to the estate that had purchased Pavel. After a red month, I invented a pretext to visit the estate. I had grown lean and ragged. No food tasted good to me, and I could not seem to remember to groom. My keepers had expressed concern, but no one guessed the truth, that I was mourning. When I visited the estate, I discovered that Pavel had been deemed too old to keep up with small children. He'd been sold within a yellow month of his arrival to a local mine. I was horrified. I lost all sense of propriety and paid a visit to the mine that very night. When I found him, he looked no better than I, ragged and starving. The mine bought cheap slaves and worked them to death. They were not meant to survive for long. When Pavel saw me, he broke down sobbing. He regretted the years he'd spent in comfortable slavery instead of trying to run away. He said that he'd wasted the strength of his youth because he'd been treated gently. Now, when he was too old to run, when he should have been writing books and teaching, he would be discarded like a used handkerchief. He spoke of how badly he missed his homeland and the loved ones he would never see again. I went half mad with grief. I wanted to fly away with him that very night, try to reach the lawless lands, anything. He convinced me not to. A good thing, because we would likely have been shot within a day. Instead, he begged me to take a message. Pavel had developed some resistance contacts when he was living in our estate. He'd even helped hide a runaway slave once. He had no idea whether the contacts would respond, but he wanted to try. I took his message. There was a reply. Within a yellow month, I, a respectable, aging brood griffin of a great house, was elbows deep in the doings of resistance pirates. Is it any wonder that we were caught? I was hardly well suited to my purpose. I'm amazed that we got as far as we did. Thessaline wrapped her arms around Cheshire's neck. The muscles there were corded and trembling. "Cheshire, I'm so sorry." The griffin shook herself. We were lucky, very lucky. The boy whom we'd cared for had returned home for a visit when Pavel and I were caught making our way to the coast to rendezvous with a pirate ship. We could have been executed. We would have been executed if the temple police had gotten wind of it. But the boy was horrified to learn of Pavel's fate. This had, of course, been kept from him. In his fury, he managed to convince his father not to turn us over to the temple, and he would not hear of Pavel being maimed for his attempt to escape death in the mines. It was a shameful way to treat a former tutor, and the Lord was inclined to agree. I was another matter. I was a house griffin. My behavior was inexcusable. Cheshire swallowed. So they hacked off my wings and tore out my claws, the mark of a griffin who has committed a grievous crime and has become a slave. I'm fortunate that they did not sell me to pull a cart. In one final act of mercy, the boy arranged for Pavel and I to be sold to the same place, the School of Minstrels here on Manse, where our manners and education would be valued, and where we might live out the rest of our days without too much harassment for our crimes. There was a long, heavy silence after Cheshire finished. Thessaline traced the ragged stumps of her wings. "Do you miss flying?" she whispered. "Every day. To be denied the sky it is as though they had forbidden you to sing." Cheshire shook her ruff. "For a time I could not even stand to see Pavel. I blamed him for my lost freedom, for the loss of the clouds and the sea wind and diving and skimming low over the ocean. Of course I was still valuable as a brood griffin. I managed to produce one more cub for the school. Mercifully, it was a female of breeding quality. She gave me something to do, someone to love for a couple of years. Then she went to live at the bestiary. I had no more cubs. The Shelts here are not unkind, but they treat you differently," said Thessaline. "I noticed. I just didn't understand." "I am disgraced," said Cheshire softly. "I am a charity case, passing time until I die. I'm useful enough to fetch supplies, to pull a cart, to help a blind girl," murmured Thessaline. Cheshire smiled. "I'm useful enough to be worth my feed, but not much more. After a few years, I started visiting Pavel again. I knew I'd been unfair. He works in the school's garden, and sometimes in the kitchens. With his education, one would think they'd use him in the library or a classroom. But many of the students here come from conservative families, and they would be shocked to see a fawn instructing Grishnards. We're both too old now for anyone to worry about. Pavel isn't even worth selling to a mine anymore. We've been friends again these last few years, and I felt truly useful helping you. Life was almost bearable, and then he became sick this last winter. He almost died, and his lungs never completely recovered. Now, with another winter coming and his body weakened, I do not think he will see the spring." Thessaline dusted herself off and stood up. "And do you think he would be cheered by that song in the old book?" "It is a song from his homeland," said Cheshire. "A sky dance song that the Chevier fauns perform with wild Pegasus. Such dances are a piece of the distant past in Wefravain, but they're alive and well in the Pendulons. I've heard him speak of them often." Thessaline was deep in thought as they walked back to the school. She bade Cheshire goodbye with an absent hug and went up to her room. Lady Margot was talking, but Thessaline hardly heard her. The tune from the old book sang softly in her head, softly and sadly, but also with hope. 3 days later, Thessaline surprised Cheshire in her nest box. "Lady," said the griffin, disapproving, as Thessaline came right in among the hay and old bones. "I would have come if summoned." "Hush," said Thessaline with a giggle. She crouched down below the wall of the nest box and pulled something out of her satchel. "Look what I have." There was a moment of silent stillness. Then Cheshire sputtered. "Thessaline, Didn't I tell you? It's all quite legal, interjected Thessaline. I asked the president if I might visit his private library, as I'm about to go on my very first official tour. I would like to impress the courts with unique material. I asked if I might borrow 2 or 3 books. He seemed impressed. Cheshire was making a grumbling noise. I was left alone with his secretary, continued Thessaline. I felt my way around, and you were right. The book was there. I borrowed it and a couple of other things that sounded interesting when he read me the titles. The secretary made a note and handed them to me, and it was all very simple. They'll ask what you were thinking when you bring it back, muttered Cheshire. Why? What would they care? Because the temple doesn't like Pegasus songs, said Cheshire. Pegasus do not worship wyverns. Thessaline was surprised. What do they worship? Just the firebird, I think. It doesn't matter. If you get too interested, they'll suspect you of resistant sympathies. Thessaline snorted. Because I'm such a threat. More than you know, muttered Cheshire. But you have the book now, and you're determined, so we might as well do this. If you excuse yourself for a walk this afternoon, I'll make sure Pavel is available. Part 3. Lady Thessaline, it is good to meet you. Pavel had a soft voice, and Thessaline thought that he must be about her own height. Although she could not see him, Thessaline had the impression that he was directing his comments at the ground. As they stood beneath the sighing firs on the wooded cliffs, she realized that she'd never spoken to a faun before, and she'd unconsciously expected them to sound different. Smaller, younger, less intelligent. She wasn't certain, but this retiring, elderly person sounded much like any of her professors. She made a little bow, sweeping her gown as she'd been taught, and Pavel gave a nervous laugh. Cheshire sputtered beside her. Lady, if you bow to the fauns at court, your instructors will have palpitations. Thessaline giggled. I know, but I'm not at court, and this is your friend. You are exceptionally kind, lady, said Pavel. If you talk to my face, she said, with an air of mischief, I'll hear you better. Pavel sounded startled. It is considered rude for a slave to look a Grishnard in the face, lady. But I can't see you, said Thessaline, and if I could, I would want to see your face. There was a moment of silence, and she heard Pavel mutter to Cheshire, I'm not sure that we're doing your young charge any favors. She's more persistent than she looks, answered Cheshire. I am blind, not deaf, said Thessaline, and they all laughed. Pavel's laughter dissolved into coughing, a deep, wet cough that left his voice softer than ever. I understand that you have a book you would like translated, he managed. Yes. Thessaline produced the book from her satchel and held it out. Pavel took it gently, not touching her hands. Oh, he breathed. She realized then that Cheshire had not told him the nature of the text. She wondered whether it would hurt Pavel's pride to know that they were doing this for him, and not as a school exercise. You do not want this translated, lady. It might offend. I know, she said softly, and I do want it translated. Cheshire and I found it in the library years ago, and she hummed me a little of the tune. I have never forgotten it. She hasn't, agreed Cheshire dryly, and she wants to know the words, even if she may never sing them at court. There was a silence, and Thessaline felt frustrated that she could not see the look Cheshire and Pavel were exchanging over her head. She tried a new tack. Why would it offend anyone, Pavel? Cheshire says it's a firebird song. Wyverns are servants of the firebird, or perhaps he's a servant of theirs. Either way, the temple is not against his messages. Pavel gave a cough. His words came out clipped and fast. The temple here has appropriated elements of the firebird because they could not eradicate him entirely. In the Pendulons... He stopped, as though suddenly conscious of what he was saying and who he was saying it to. Forgive me, lady. I forget myself. Before Thessaline could think what to say, he continued. Without context, the song might not draw much attention. Perhaps you might even be able to use it on occasion. It's a sky dance song. Pegasus and the Pendulons are not bred to bond with Shelts as griffins are in Wefravain. Most Pegasus live wild. Some flocks migrate vast distances to breed and lay their eggs. Some even fly through these islands. No one knows all the places they go. It is said that some flocks sail to a star, or to an island on the cusp between the worlds, or past the edge, to the shores beyond the world. Some have annual migrations, some biennial or even triennial, and when they come through the Pendulons in the fall, when all 3 moons are full, they fly through the city of Clyperion. He stopped and swallowed, and Thessalon knew that he was speaking of his homeland. Many flocks who've traveled untold distances come together with the jungle Pegasus and the local Pegasus bonded to Shelts. They all come together in the great portico and fly the sky dance. They sing, and every year the song is a little different. It starts as it ended the year before, but they add verses and ideas, and so it changes over time. The tune remains roughly the same. They fly a complex pattern during the dance, Pegasus of all colors and sizes, under the vast dome of the great portico, and the Shelts walk upon their backs. "Walk?" breathed Thessalon. "Yes," said Pavel, caught up in his own narrative. "The Shelts who are brave enough step out from the walkway high above and walk the pattern of the dance, each step caught by a different Pegasus passing underneath. And if they dance well and fearlessly, a wild Pegasus may take notice of them and speak with them afterward. And sometimes that Pegasus chooses to leave the flock and live among Shelts. It is not the only way to gain a mount, for foals are born to bonded Pegasus, but it is considered the best way, because we go to them, you see. We Shelts leave our element, the ground, and we enter their element, the sky, and we put our lives in their keeping, and that is how we meet one another." Thessalon let out a long breath. "It sounds so beautiful. What does it have to do with the firebird?" Pavel seemed to struggle for a moment. "The wild Pegasus have a word for him. There is no good Grishnard translation. It means the opposite of chaos, the spirit of creation, of patterns. And every pattern, every creation, is an act against chaos, against the darkness. The sky dance is always dedicated to him. There are no wyverns in the Pendulons, and no slaves either. Every creature capable of creating is considered of equal value." Thessalon thought about this. She was not sure that she understood, but she liked the way it sounded. "I want to hear the words." There was a moment of silence. Thessalon heard the rustle of vellum pages turning. "This is very old," murmured Pavel. "We know," said Cheshire. Thessalon could imagine the griffin looking around, just to make sure that they were completely alone on the isolated cliff. Pavel was humming under his breath. Thessalon recognized the tune. "It seemed impossibly complicated," ventured Cheshire. "But perhaps I misunderstood the music." "No," said Pavel. "The author has attempted to capture the many harmonies sung by different flocks of Pegasus. No single voice could produce all that music. It is a song for many voices, but the main melody is here at the top. This is, of course, a version of the song sung hundreds of years ago. It will not be the song sung in Clyperion this fall, or even decades ago when I was there. The title, literally translated, is Walk Upon High. It means the sky dance." "Is it only sung in Clyperion?" asked Thessalon with a frown. "I'm sure that Pegasus sometimes fly through here in the fall." "The lady is perceptive," said Pavel. "The sky dance is performed in villages all over the Pendulons. Many of the new verses are created before the flocks arrive in Clyperion, where we have the largest convergence of flocks. Those flocks whose migrations take them 2 or 3 years pass through other places during certain fall seasons, such as your islands." He was silent for a few moments more, then began to sing, a restrained, measured sound. Thessalon thought that he was trying to keep from coughing. She had heard High Grishnard before, a word here and there, as Cheshire had said, but never full phrases. The liquid syllables seemed made for music. After a few verses, Pavel broke off, coughing. "I am sorry, lady. My chest." "Oh, don't be sorry," exclaimed Thessaline. "It's lovely. I don't understand why we don't write ballads in High Grishnard, or Shavier, or whatever language it is." She thought she detected a smile in Pavel's voice when he answered. Wild Pegasus sing to each other more than they talk. They share news and gossip that way. Our language, the Shavier language, derives from theirs, so it is, in a sense, made from song. "Please begin again," said Thessaline. "One verse at a time, and tell me what it means if you can." "It is poetry," said Pavel. "Old poetry at that. Some of these words seem archaic even to me. It may not translate well." "Try," said Thessaline, and so he did. She hummed with him during the first verse, and by the second, she was creating harmonies with the melody line. Pavel seemed delighted. "That's right," he said, when they stopped. "You understand exactly, lady." The verses were awkward in common Grishnard, but Thessaline liked the feel of them. She reshaped her favorites into lines that sounded more like the song she knew. "Meet me on the bridge of feathers. Meet me where our worlds collide. Meet me where the wind blows, in the chambers of the sky. We are the memory of old tomorrows. We are the bridge to yesteryears. We are the song that rhymes with forever. We are the pattern that knows no fear." By mid-afternoon, they completed the dozen verses in the ancient book. "Much of this text is devoted to the various harmony lines," explained Pavel. "It's an attempt to transcribe something that is truly untranscribable. If you ever did manage to capture it, the song would only morph again within days." "We should be getting back," said Cheshire. She'd been pacing the tree line while they sang and talked. "Of course." Pavel stepped away, and Thessaline sensed a new distance in his voice. "But you will come again," she said. "Thessaline," began Cheshire. "I have not mastered all the Shavier words yet," she said firmly. "We will work on this until I do. I insist." "Don't call it Shavier," said Cheshire, with a real warning in her voice. "High Grishnard," said Thessaline humbly. "But you will come again, won't you, Pavel? Cheshire and I will walk here almost every day until the snow falls." Pavel hesitated. Thessaline wondered whether she was being selfish. "Will you get into trouble?" she whispered. "I don't mean to get you in trouble." Pavel gave a laugh that was probably meant to reassure her. "Not unless they find out what I'm teaching you. Otherwise, anyone who discovers us will think I was only sneaking away to visit Cheshire. They've been letting me do that for years." Cheshire laughed too, then. "Our history has its uses." "I would have an easier time coming in the late afternoon or evening," continued Pavel, "and I couldn't come every day. But if it would please you, I'll try." "Late afternoon, then," said Thessaline. "I mustn't be out after dark, but the days are still long enough to give us some time. Meet us here if you can. It would please me very much." Part 4. She could tell that it pleased Pavel and Cheshire too, although they did not say so. As the late summer blustered into fall, and the smells of fresh earth turned to scents of wet leaves and moss, Thessaline contrived to find herself evening after evening in the company of an aging, wingless griffin and a fawn slave. She learned all the verses of the song in the old book, and a few more besides, verses that Pavel remembered from the sky dances of his youth. He taught her a few other Shavier songs as well, including a strange ballad about a fawn named Flag who had hunted wyverns in the long ago. It was, of course, an unholy song, and learning it made Thessaline a little uncomfortable. However, the wyverns in the song were clearly cruel and vindictive, not at all like the benevolent gods of the islands, and so she reasoned that the wyverns of the ballad were not the same creatures at all. Pavel was a natural instructor. Thessaline had to stop herself from calling him sir. He maintained his professional demeanor so well that it took Thessaline some time to fully grasp what Cheshire had told her earlier in the year. Pavel was sick. His cough never got any better, and, on the rare occasions when Thessaline contrived to touch his hand or his arm, she found him bony and frail. Sometimes, as they were walking back, Pavel walked on the other side of Cheshire, and Thessaline suspected that he kept a hand on the griffin's shoulder to keep from falling. "Am I making it worse by asking him to teach me?" Thessaline asked Cheshire one afternoon, as they started for the cliffs. Cheshire's voice held a smile as she answered, "I haven't seen him so happy in years." "Really?" "He's giving you his legacy, Thessaline." "Legacy?" she echoed. It seemed too much for a 9-year-old girl. Who else would he give it to? Who else would want it? He was trained to be a scholar, Thessaline. I wasn't sure at first. I lost so much last time I took a risk for Pavel. But this is good. Thessaline stayed longer than usual that day. Pavel wanted to teach her the Xavier music scale, which included quarter steps, which were absent in the Grischnard scale. Not until Cheshire cleared her throat did Thessaline realize how the air had become chilly, and the sun's rays no longer warmed her face. "We should be getting back," said Cheshire. "The head mistress will have all kinds of questions if you're out after dark." "One song," said Thessaline, who was tired of scales and frustrated that she hadn't actually sung anything that day. "Let me see if I can sing the Skydance song better now that I have the right scale in my head." Cheshire grunted, and Thessaline reached out to pat Pavel's hand. "What do you think, Pavel? One song?" "I would always welcome a song from you, Thessaline." His voice held real affection, and Thessaline remembered what Cheshire had said earlier. "His legacy." She shivered. "The snows will come soon. Our last walk could be any day." She stood straight, as though she were at court, held her head high, and began to sing. The sublime, breathy syllables of the Xavier language rose quavering in her not-quite-adult voice, and the haunting melody of the sky dance floated out over the cliffs. Thessaline tested the edges this time, tested her range, and the ways in which she could play with the music. She added all the verses that Pavel had taught her. She was nearing the end when, to her surprise, another voice joined her. It was not Pavel's voice, and it certainly was not Cheshire's. Thessaline faltered. Then, at her side, Cheshire whispered, "Keep singing." She felt Pavel's frail hand on her opposite arm. "Please," he whispered. She did. More voices joined in. They were high in the air overhead, then sweeping low in front of her, and then behind and all around. With a trembling delight, Thessaline knew who they were. She stepped forward, away from Cheshire and Pavel. Feathers brushed her face, and Thessaline's voice soared. The Pegasus were not just singing with her. They were mimicking her own voice, sending it out over the cliffs in dozens of harmonies. They tested her notes and gave them back to her again, new and changed and even more beautiful. They sang new verses of the song that Thessaline didn't even understand, but somehow they never clashed with her own words. Thessaline stopped at last, overcome, but the singing continued, a choir all around them. She sensed Cheshire at her side again. The griffin spoke. Her voice choked. "Go." Thessaline was confused for a moment. Then Pavel reached out to squeeze her hand and walked past her towards the cliff. Thessaline's fingers closed in Cheshire's ruff. "What's happening?" she whispered. Cheshire spoke softly. "They're dancing, flying a pattern around us, blue and gold and green feathers. They're making a path out beyond the edge of the cliff. And Pavel?" She broke off. "What?" Thessaline had never felt so frustrated with her blindness. "What happened? Is he—" "He's walking," breathed Cheshire. "Walking on their backs. Just like he said. A new Pegasus catching him with every step." Thessaline could tell that the singing was moving away. "What now?" she demanded. "Have they let him fall?" "No," murmured Cheshire. Her voice came from high up, and Thessaline could tell that she was craning her neck as far as it would go. The flock is moving away with him, going higher, into the sunset. I think he may be on one of their backs now. I'm certain he never fell. The singing had died away into the distance. Thessaline wanted to dance and laugh and cry all at the same time. Instead, she stood frozen, gripping Cheshire's ruff. Where will they take him? Cheshire's tail twitched, unconsciously slapping Thessaline's shoulders. Clyperion? A star? An island? The shores beyond the world? There, certainly, in the end. I don't think he has the strength to make it home. But he'll be free, said Thessaline, and he wanted that very much. She hesitated. I know he would have taken you with him, if he could have. Cheshire snorted. Beasts cannot walk the sky dance. I will never fly again. Well, only once. I wish I could go, murmured Thessaline. Cheshire shook herself. You have a brilliant career ahead of you, lady, and an apprentice tour that will be legendary. Let's get you back to the dormitory before this walk becomes a scandal. Cheshire. The griffin was walking fast now, away from the cliff, and Thessaline struggled to keep pace. You understand that you must never speak of this, don't you, Thessaline? A wild Pegasus do not normally fly away with shelts, not even Xavier. If it is thought that you somehow helped a slave escape... Cheshire shuddered. Your career would be ruined, and your life would be in danger. Pavel was old, and they will probably think that he simply went away to die. Promise me that you will never speak of it. Her voice had grown so serious that Thessaline merely bowed her head. I promise. But Cheshire, what did you mean just now, when you said that you would never fly again, except once? It was nothing, lady. Come, we must hurry. Thessaline stopped walking. Cheshire, look at me. Cheshire gave an impatient snort. An odd request from you, lady. I know, but I want your attention. Thessaline reached up and took the griffin's beak in one hand. You told me once that all your cubs had gone away, but that's not true. You had one more cub, Cheshire. You had me. Oh, lady. Cheshire dropped her great head on Thessaline's shoulder. Don't call me lady, whimpered Thessaline. If you came up here and jumped off that cliff, I should not have said that, murmured Cheshire. I was only thinking of how I will miss Pavel. Thessaline, don't cry. Thessaline buried her face against the griffin's feathered neck, inhaling the warm, familiar scent. I asked Professor Ricard yesterday if I might bring you with me on the tour, to help me find my way in all the strange places I'll visit. Cheshire grew perfectly still. They'll never permit. The weight allowance on an airship. He said maybe, whispered Thessaline, without letting go of Cheshire's neck. He said it would come out of my weight allowance for the trip, but I don't have boxes of jeweled necklaces and bangles and cloth of gold gowns like all the other ladies. I just have you. I need you. Will you come with me and be my friend and my ally in all these strange places? Cheshire swallowed, her face close against Thessaline's. Yes, lady. Thessaline. Yes, I will. Thessaline's grip tightened. And will you never walk here on the cliffs alone? Promise me. Cheshire laughed and relaxed. She rubbed her feathered ears against Thessaline's face, tickling her nose and making her giggle through her tears. I promise. She hesitated. But I hope we will walk here together sometimes and think of Pavel. I will miss him a very great deal. I know, said Thessaline, but you won't miss him alone. I think, in a way, he was my best teacher. I know I'll think of him every time I sing the Sky Dance song, up here on the cliffs in summer. I think he'd like that. Yes, smiled Cheshire. I think he would. Author's note: this story was created as a contest prize for Tibby Scott, who created a puppet show to celebrate the launch of the podcast edition of the Guild of the Cowry Catchers Book 4. Thessaline is a major character in the Cowry Catchers series. She's 21 years old when that story begins. Her apprentice tour is indeed a success, as is her debut tour 4 years later. She has many offerings of patronage, but chooses to return to her home island of Hollivaris in the Small Kingdoms. Her father survives to see her installed as court minstrel there. Thessaline purchases Cheshire's freedom with gifts given to her during her tours, and takes the griffin with her to Hollivaris. Cheshire has several happy years there, and then dies of age-related illness when Thessaline is 17. Unfortunately, Thessaline makes enemies during her tour as well. Temple authorities do not appreciate her occasional performance of Xavier songs. When she falls in love with the prince of her island kingdom, their affair sparks a chain of disastrous events, which kicks off the Cowry Catchers series. If you are new to this world and its author, be advised that Cowry Catchers is new adult fantasy. The series includes sexual scenes and situations and is not intended for children or young teens. The Prophet of Panamindorah is a young adult series set in the same world but in a distant time and place. Prophet is appropriate for a slightly younger audience. Both series are available as ebooks as well as podcasts. Music for this production was Long Road Ahead, At Rest, and The Truth and the Legend, all by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. Cover art was by Sarah Cloutier. I'm Abigail Hilton. I hope you enjoyed this presentation of Skydance.
And I'm back. This is 2026 Abby, coming to you with a few thoughts on this episode. I had considered running this as 2 episodes because it is kind of long, but in the end, I did not want to stop listening in the middle of the story, so I decided that you probably did not either. I'm still really happy with this one. I wrote Skydance in 2013, and for some reason, I had it in my head that this was the first thing I wrote after returning to writing from anesthesia school, but that is not true. The first thing I wrote was the rewrite of Hunter's Unlucky. Hunters and those characters have brought me back to life more than once. I would also say that Hunters brought me back to life after the pandemic. And yeah, that was actually the first thing that I tackled after getting out of anesthesia school, not having written anything for about 2.5 years after Cowry Catchers, just producing audio. And then I jumped back into that novel, which was the first novel I ever wrote as a teenager, and all writing advice would have said that I should have trunked it. And I didn't. I returned to it, and I rewrote the entire novel from scratch in a clean document, looking at the old one, but not keeping any of the text, and making copious notes to myself about what I was changing and why. And I have talked about this before on here. You can pick up that novel. I hope you do at some point. You can also pick up all of my copious notes from my website. Anyway, I wrote Skydance at the beginning of 2000... That's Mochi. Buddy. He wants to comment. I wrote Skydance at the beginning of 2013 when I was almost finished with Hunters. I was almost finished with the Hunters rewrite. I went and glanced at my document because I have a word count document that shows me the number of words I wrote on every single day starting at the beginning of 2013. And I've been writing, I don't want to say every day, but always planning to write every day since I was like 14 years old. But I did not start keeping a daily word count document until I was like 30. So there's a lot of untracked years in there, and I honestly would be very curious to see my early tracking, but I don't have it. What I have starts in 2013. So Skydance was actually the first thing that went into that document, and you can also see my Hunter's Unlucky word counts around it. I wrote Skydance in like a week, I think. Week and a half at the very beginning of the year. It was my New Year's project. And you can see my Hunter's words coming right after it and around it. And then I finished the rewrite of Hunter's just a month or two later. Anyway, I had been away from the Cowry Catcher's characters from a little while at the point when I wrote this. And I was not at this point in time planning a big return to the world, but I was having some stories percolate in my brain and some unanswered questions and threads from the novel that I could pull on. And as you heard in the afterword, I let a fan vote on a character for a story after winning a contest. I can't remember the terms of the contest. People made some really adorable stuff. Anyway, she won, and I let her vote on the character, and she chose Thessalon. And I thought about it and was like, I would really like to flesh out how and why she knew the Skydance song that she sings with the Pegasus as they are coming back to Lecklock after the disaster with the spiders. She sings that song on deck, and everyone is entranced, and that's also the moment when Silvio kind of considers running away with she and Gerard, but then Arundel shoots one of the Pegasus and it all kind of falls apart. But I thought to myself, how did she know that song? How did she know a Pegasus song? And a Skydance song in particular. The Skydance was something from Walk Upon High, which I have talked about before on here. It was a novel that originally, that was kind of the seed ideas for Cowry Catchers. Cowry Catchers was going to be a prequel novel to that one, and Cowry Catchers ended up taking over the entire thing, and I ended up taking the narrative in a different direction. I was originally supposed to kill Silvio at the end of Cowry Catchers. I decided not to do that, among many other things, and so Walk Upon High's plot became incompatible with the plot of Cowry Catchers, and I wanted to keep Cowry Catchers more, so that was the book that survived. But anyway, the Skydance that I describe in this story, and Clyperian and the Great Portico, those are all places from that other novel, and places that still exist in the existing canon of Wefervain. They're just not places we actually end up going. But anyway, I wanted to repurpose some of the ideas from that book, which I did think were cool. I thought the concept of the Skydance was cool, so I repurposed that into this story, and also kind of fleshed out some of the aspects of life in Wefervain that are pretty awful and brutal, and some of the ways that the Griffins are kind of both perpetrators and victims of the system. They're one of those middle status creatures that are both victims and victimizers in the system, and the different and complex ways that prejudice plays out, gets internalized, gets folded again and again into people's psyches and into cycles of violence. Anyway, obviously the afterword that I left attached to this story is the original afterword. I say some things in there that I wouldn't say now. For instance, at that time, the term new adult was really popular for basically anything that had kind of a young adult feel, but there was sex in the story. Like that was really what new adult was, and it was a hazy category that didn't make a ton of sense, and I have not heard the term in quite a while, so that term kind of died. Anyway, it was a term that could conceivably fit Cowry Catchers at the time. I don't know. I think Cowry Catchers is an adult story, but I do think it is a kind of story that often speaks to people in their 20s. And that was exactly the demographic that new adult was being applied to. Anyway, if you're wondering, what on earth is that? It was a term that was going around at that point in time, in 2013-ish. I mentioned the Prophet of Panamindorah podcast in there. I think I know I've mentioned that before on this podcast. Prophet was the first Panamindorah series I wrote. There is no longer a free Prophet of Panamindorah podcast, although I might bring it back, just like I brought back Cowry Catchers. I think in a lot of ways, Prophet did best as a podcast. I originally created it to be a podcast, and I might bring it back probably in its own feed at some point. Just put out the original episodes, put out some commentary, and give that story a new life in its original form. But as of this moment, you cannot get it as a free podcast. You can get it inexpensively on my website or in a host of other places on any retailer. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed Skydance. Listening to it, I was not embarrassed of my performance. I usually feel when I listen to myself perform books that a voice actor would have done a better job, like somebody who does it more professionally. But I'm happy with this one. I think it sounds the way I wanted it to sound. At the time that I wrote this story, I had no intention apart from exploring Thessalin's early life and the specific question of how she knew that song. However, this novella became intrinsic to the plot of the final book. It is actually one of the more important short stories. Next week, we will have Harbor Wave, which is a story about what Gerard was doing the day before he met Thessalin. It's a good story, and I will see you in that episode. This is Abigail Hilton, and you have been listening to the Pirates of Wefravain saga. Join me on Patreon for early episodes, long-form interviews, forum access, personal updates, and lots of artwork, including maps and species charts. That's patreon.com/Abigail Hilton. If you want the whole story now with no interruptions and some remastering of the early books for sound quality, you can find the entire series at shop.abigailhilton.com, along with all my other novels. The audiobooks are delivered by BookFunnel. Background music was Hidden Sky by Jamie Sieber, licensed from Magnatune.net circa 2014. The Guild of the Cowry Catchers podcast is an audio adaptation of the Pirates of Wefravain saga, written and produced by Abigail Hilton. Original production copyright 2010, all rights are reserved to the author.